Both armies knew the key to victory at Shiloh was possession of Pittsburg Landing, and on the night of April 6th of 1862, the Union still had possession of this area and had begun fortifying this line throughout the day. Despite this formidable position, the Confederates would launch one final attack, believing they can still break this line. Will they succeed? Let's find out. So right now we are currently on the Pittsburg Landing Road, and to our left, this is the position that would be known as Grant's last line. Now, all throughout the day on April 6th of 1862, Grant had been working to build a last-ditch perimeter to defend Pittsburg Landing. Now, Colonel Joseph Webster, Grant's chief of staff, was ordered by Grant to establish a defensive line at the landing, and he would mass 51 cannon along this ridge here bordering the Pittsburg Landing Road here, and Pittsburg Landing is in that direction. And the reason why we stopped here is because one of those batteries was Madison's Illinois battery, and he had 5 24-pound heavy siege guns. Now, the whole Union plan was to take Corinth. So they arrived at Pittsburg Landing, and they were waiting for all the armies in this area to consolidate, and they would move on Corinth, which was a vital Confederate rail hub. And in order to take that city, they needed these siege guns. Well, things changed here at Shiloh, and instead of conducting a siege, these siege guns were now part of a defense of the Union lifeline here, and you can just see the sheer size of these cannons here. And to our left is the rest of the battlefield of Shiloh, and the Confederate forces were all along this area. Now, following a lot of the major action here, the Confederate forces would pull back to a lot of the captured Union camps, and all throughout the night this line would be reinforced by fresh troops under Buell's army manning this area here. Now in the distance here you have some traditional field artillery, and right here is one of the siege guns that was manning this line. And just look at the sheer size of this piece here. And like we said, these were 24-pound siege guns, so that meant that the projectile that it fired weighed 24 pounds. Imagine that being hurled towards your line and the impact and concussion that would cause. So we moved just behind what would be known as Grant's last line, and we are in the Shiloh National Cemetery. And right now we are at the location where Grant would establish his headquarters on the night of April 6th of 1862. Now where you see the monument was a large oak tree, and Grant would place himself under this oak tree on the night of April 6th, a few hundred yards back from the riverbank, and this is where he would spend the night. That would be long, cold, and rainy, and apparently the oak tree that was standing here was destroyed by a storm in 1909, but right here, this is where Grant would establish his headquarters. Pittsburg Landing is a couple hundred yards in this direction here, but Grant's headquarters was established where the Shiloh Cemetery now sits. Around midnight, William Tecumseh Sherman would approach Grant, who he found sitting under a tree alone in the pouring rain. Sherman would approach Grant and say, "Well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we?" Grant would reply, "Yep, we'll lick 'em tomorrow, though." You know, it's a pretty neat experience being right next to where Grant had his headquarters. You know, on the night of April 6th, it was cold, it's rainy. Think about all the men that are still in the field suffering. Think about all the men that have died today. And yet, somehow, you've managed to hold this last line here and keep your lifeline open, that is Pittsburg Landing. Grant thoroughly believed that he was going to win this battle. He never admitted defeat here. And we know on the next morning of April 7th of 1862, he would begin taking back a lot of this lost ground. Now, despite the strength of the Union line here, the Confederates wanted to launch one last assault on the Union left flank closest to Pittsburg Landing in an area called Dill Branch, and that is where we're going to be headed next. So right now we are in a position called Dill Branch. Now the reason why this position is relevant because this area saw the last Confederate attack on April 6th of 1862 against Union lines. Now in this direction, several hundred yards, you had what would be known as Grant's last line. That's where we just were, and all throughout the day as Union troops were pulling back to Pittsburg Landing and reinforcements were arriving, Grant had that line along Pittsburg Landing fortified. Now the Confederates wanted to see if they could punch through this line, so they sent 4,000 troops forward, 2 Confederate brigades under the command of Brigadier General John Jackson and Brigadier General James Chalmers. And they were positioned to the south of us here, and they were told, be ready for one final assault. And many of the men within the 2 brigades here, some of them didn't even have ammunition. Keep in mind, they've been fighting here all day. Now they're told to assault one last time, and look at the terrain here at Shiloh. Just look at what they would have had to go through. Look how steep this hill is. And then it dips down to this low point, and now you have to advance back up. And we're under heavy artillery fire. You have a well-fortified line to our front, and then you had 2 timber-clad Union gunboats on the other side of this embankment here in the Tennessee River shelling our flank. You had the USS Lexington and the USS Tyler sending massive shells into our ranks. And this is what the men of the Confederate Army had to advance through. And we're going to head a little bit further in this direction to see if we can see more terrain features here.
When within 300 or 400 yards of the river, the enemy opened on us with their gunboats and 2 batteries in position near the riverbank, which sounded terribly and looked ugly and hurt but few. Our men began to discover this fact. Being now nearly night, I fell back by an order from General Bragg, Colonel John D. Martin.
The Confederates attacked from the southwest, the worst point they could have chosen, for it forced them to cross a hollow that opened into the river and exposed them to the fire of the gunboats. The large-bore guns aboard the boats had been double-shotted with canister. Lieutenant Colonel William Cam, 14th Illinois Infantry.
So we would advance a little farther north of Dill Branch, and once again, looking at the terrain here, look how it just slopes straight up. And we're kind of in a low point here. And remember, keep in mind, we're being hit by heavy artillery fire from our flank by the 2 Union gunboats in the Tennessee River. And we're also being hit by 2 Union batteries directly to our front, the 1st Minnesota and the 8th Ohio. And despite this heavy artillery fire, Brigadier General John Jackson's brigade, consisting of Texans and Alabamians, they managed to reach the northern slope here, but unfortunately for them, they became pinned down. So just imagine being a Confederate soldier. You've been fighting all day here. You've seen some horrific fighting, and now you're told to assault Grant's last line. Keep in mind, the Confederates probably didn't realize how strong that line is, and now we're in essentially a ravine, being hit by Union gunboats on our right flank, and now we're getting hit by Union artillery to our front, and now we're pinned down on this north slope here. And I just wanted to show you just how steep it truly is. We're trying to make our way up. And just imagine just being exhausted. Artillery fire hitting us from the front and flank. Men are dropping. Some of us may not even have ammunition. And we're trying to make our way up this terrain here to assault the Union line. And we're nowhere even near it yet.
In attempting to mount the last ridge, we were met by a fire from a whole line of batteries protected by infantry and assisted by shells from the gunboats. Our men struggled vainly to ascend the hill, which was very steep, making charge after charge without success. General James Chalmers.
Despite numerous attempts charging the Union line, this final Confederate attack was over in just 20 minutes. This ravine was now filled with Confederate dead and dying. These men had charged straight into rifle and canister fire with deadly results. Overall Commander P.G.T. Beauregard ordered this attack to stop and stated, "Victory was sufficiently complete." Beauregard would order his men to fall back to the now captured Union camps. So we moved out of Dill Branch, and I wanted to show you the position of the two Union gunboats that were pouring heavy artillery fire into the flank of the Confederate forces. Now, what you're seeing here, this isn't the position of a Union battery. This is just showing you the types of guns that were on the USS Lexington and the USS Tyler. And each boat was equipped with two 32-pound cannon, along with four 8-inch smoothbore cannons. And those two boats were positioned just out here in the Tennessee River. Now you can see we are built up quite a ways. During the time of the battle, this ridge that we're on in the modern day road wasn't nearly as high. They built up this area for flooding, so we would have been a little closer to the water here, but the USS Lexington and the USS Tyler were right out here delivering their massive artillery shells into the flanks of the Confederate soldiers here. And just to kind of tie things together here, down here is Dill Branch, and those two Confederate brigades would have been advancing in this direction towards Pittsburg Landing. These once quiet fields and forests were now littered with dead and dying men from both armies. Starting at 9 p.m., the two Union gunboats fired a shell every 10 minutes towards Confederate positions. No sleep would be had on this rainy and cold night. Unfortunately for both armies, there was still a whole nother day of fighting and dying.
At a late hour in the afternoon, a desperate effort was made by the enemy to turn our left and get possession of the landing, transports, etc. This point was guarded by the gunboats Tyler and Lexington, Captains Gwynn and Shirk, U.S. Navy, commanding four 20-pound Parrott guns and a battery of rifle guns. As there is a deep and impassable ravine for artillery or cavalry, and very difficult for infantry at this point, no troops were stationed here except for the necessary artillerists and a small infantry force for their support. An advance was immediately made upon the point of attack, and the enemy soon driven back. In this repulse, much is due to the presence of the gunboats Tyler and Lexington and their able commanders, Captains Gwynn and Shirk. Major General Ulysses S. Grant.